Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into a book that's made some serious waves. Kristin Hannah's The Women. It only came out in 2024, but wow, it's really sparked a lot of talk about hidden histories and the impact of war. Okay, let's unpack this, our mission today. To explore the story, where it came from, how it landed, and what it tells us about a group often overlooked in history. So if you've heard the buzz or you're just curious about stories that kind of reshape how we see the past, you're definitely in the right place for this deep dive.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here truly is that this isn't just, another Vietnam War narrative. Hannah really zooms in on a perspective we don't often get. The women, specifically the nurses in the Army Nurse Corps, her main character, Frankie McGrath, embodies this. It brings a really vital but often forgotten slice of history right to the forefront.
That's such a key point, the overlooked perspective. So diving right into The Women, Frankie McGrath. She starts off as this, well, maybe slightly naive young nurse from Southern California Garden Grove, and she makes this huge decision to volunteer for Vietnam. Hannah, of course, she's brilliant at weaving history into fiction, right? And she sets this story against that really turbulent Vietnam War era. The timeline stretches from 66 to 82.
Yeah, quite a span.
Right. And we follow Frankie from sunny California to, well, the chaos of Vietnam, and then back to a very changed America, places like Virginia, Montana. But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Beyond just the setting, it's about the personal cost, especially for the women who served, whose sacrifices often just faded into the background.
Absolutely. And focusing on nurses like Frankie, I mean, that's so significant. These women weren't just on the sidelines. They were right there experiencing the trauma, the chaos, the moral messiness of it all, working in makeshift conditions, sometimes under fire, doing absolutely critical work. But as the book shows so clearly, their stories were often just forgotten back home. Yeah. And that silence, it's not just an accident, is it? It points to something deeper about how society viewed women in war and their struggles afterwards. The book really pushes us to face that collective forgetting and think about what service really means and, how we remember or don't remember different groups.
So thinking about their return, what unique challenges did these women face compared to the men coming back?
That's a great question because it hits right at that forgotten part. Male veterans, they face terrible difficulties, no question. But there was at least some kind of narrative, however flawed, for the returning soldier. For women, especially nurses, often they weren't even really seen as veterans in the same way.
Right, they didn't fit the mold.
Exactly. They faced dismissal, people just not getting it, and a real lack of support for the wounds they carried, physical and psychological. No parades for them, often just, try to forget it, or even being told their service didn't really count. That isolation is a huge part of Frankie's story, isn't it?
It really is. And speaking of the story, the origin of this book is pretty incredible, too. Hannah first had the idea, 20 years before it was published?
Yeah, staggering.
Initially thought of it as a love story, but kept putting it aside. It just didn't click, apparently.
Yeah.
So what finally made it happen?
Well, that's where things get really interesting with the timing. She started working on it seriously in early 2020, right after finishing The Four Winds.
Yeah.
And this was, of course, right when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. She was basically confined to her home on an island near Seattle.
Oh, okay.
And she actually said, quote, "It wasn't until the pandemic, watching our nurses and doctors serving on the front lines, that it all came together for me." She said, "That's when I knew I was ready to write about the women who served in the war and were forgotten at home."
Wow. So the pandemic wasn't just downtime. It was perspective.
Exactly. It provided this contemporary mirror. Suddenly, everyone was seeing the sacrifices of medical staff, the toll it takes, the isolation. It gave her this fresh lens, this deeper empathy, maybe, to go back to the Vietnam nurses story, seeing those echoes across time.
That makes so much sense, how present-day events can just illuminate the past. And you feel her personal connection to that era, too, right? She grew up during the war. She talked about the huge shadow it cast, remembering the protests, the marches, the way society felt so divided.
It wasn't abstract history for her.
Not at all. And get this, as a kid, she wore one of those silver POW bracelets. For her close friend's dad, a pilot who was shot down and never came back. Imagine wearing that every day, a constant reminder. And that detail shows up directly in the book, doesn't it? Frankie buys a similar bracelet.
For Major Robert Welch, 1/16/1967, it's such a specific, grounding detail.
It really is. It makes the huge scale of the war intensely personal.
Which raises an important question, I think. How much do our own lives, our present moments, shape the stories we tell about the past? That bracelet, It's more than just plot, isn't it? It's this symbol of loss, of memory, the individual cost. It connects the home front to the soldier's fate in a really tangible way.
Definitely.
And Hannah, she really did her homework. She read lots of memoirs by nurses who were actually there in Vietnam, and she noticed these common threads, difficulty adjusting back home, feeling isolated, dealing with PTSD.
So the research backed up the emotional core.
Completely. And her choice of Frankie, the naive Californian Hannah, said she felt she could really connect with that background, having grown up nearby herself. It allowed her, maybe, to give Frankie's journey an authenticity. It's that blend of research and personal empathy that makes it hit home.
And clearly it did hit home. I mean, the success of this book is just
Yeah.
huge. It went straight to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list right when it came out in February 2024.
Right off the bat.
But it wasn't just a flash in the pan. It stayed there for 8 weeks straight. Ended up being #1 for 10 weeks total. It's the most frequent #1 bestseller that year.
Incredible staying power.
And beyond sales, it was one of the most borrowed books in U.S. public libraries in 2024. That says a lot, too. So what does all that success tell us? Is it just a popular book or something more?
Well, I think it tells us a lot more than just sales figures. It suggests there was this real, maybe unspoken hunger for these kinds of stories. Stories about women's contributions, especially in war, that have been sidelined. And the timing, like we talked about with the pandemic highlighting frontline workers, that probably created this perfect moment for the book to land.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It really shows how powerful historical fiction can be, right? It can bring history to life, create empathy, and reach millions who might not pick up a straight history text. It clearly tapped into something.
Absolutely. And then there's the critical side. It's always interesting to see how the reviewers react, especially with a book this big. The reception for the women, it was mostly positive, but not universally, right? Kirkus reviews, for instance, they called it dramatic, vividly detailed reconstruction of a little-known aspect of the Vietnam War. What kind of details did they mean?
Well, reviewers often picked up on how Hannah makes you feel like you're there. The heat, the sounds, the pressure cooker environment of the MASH units. Beatrice Williams in the New York Times Book Review praised her for recentering the story on the experience of women. She said, Hannah was in top form here, plunging the reader into the chaotic miseries of the combat zone, using details with visceral effect.
Visceral effects, so really making you feel it.
Exactly. The details aren't just facts, they're part of Frankie's lived reality. The exhaustion, the fear, the small moments of connection. And Alice Carey at Bookpage echoed that, saying, Hannah blends the big historical picture with a plot that just pulls you in, even with tough subjects, making complex history feel immediate and accessible.
Okay, so lots of praise for the vividness, the emotional pull, the focus on women. But like you said, not everyone was convinced.
Precisely, and this is where it gets really interesting for discussion. Meredith Moran, writing for the Boston Globe, was quite critical. She basically accused Hannah of using cliches and underestimating her readers. Moran suggested the book could have been stronger if it was cut significantly, removing what she saw as predictable or matronizing.
Oof. That's pretty harsh criticism.
It is, and it highlights this tension you often see, doesn't it? Between popular fiction that aims for broad appeal and emotional connection, and literary critics who might be looking for more nuance, maybe more stylistic complexity, or a less perhaps straightforward portrayal of trauma. It makes you think, what do we expect when we read historical fiction? Can a book be a massive bestseller and satisfy every critical standard?
That's a tough balance.
It really is. It's a debate that comes up again and again, and the women is right in the middle of it. But having these different viewpoints, the praise and the critique, it actually gives us and you, the listener, a much richer picture of the book and how people are engaging with it.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
So wrapping up this deep dive, The Women has clearly done something significant. It's brought these stories of Vietnam nurses out of the shadows for so many people, sparked real conversation. And the story's not stopping there, Warner Bros. Already snapped up the film rights back in January 2024.
We might be seeing it on screen soon then.
Could be. So whether it's the history, Frankie's journey, or just the buzz around it, this book gives you a lot to chew on.
It really does. And I think what this deep dive underscores isn't just the specifics of the story, but that bigger question. Whose stories do we usually hear? Whose get remembered? And what happens when we finally listen to those forgotten narratives? It doesn't just change our view of the past. It can shift how we see things right now. So maybe something to think about as you go about your day is, what other forgotten histories are out there just waiting? And what could they teach us?